form the sanitation district. And we were formed by public referendum, which when you think about how challenging it is to get the public behind any particular cause today, it wasn't much different in 1940. It was a very challenging referendum, but it did create a unique political subdivision to deal with cleaning up the Hampton roads. And so we like to think of ourselves as the grassroots and water quality environmentalists in Hampton roads, because we've been at it for some time. We're proud of our permit compliance record. We actually have one treatment plant that's got the longest consecutive number of years, 25 years of perfect permit compliance. We operate 14 plants, and they're all really well operated. We serve 1.6 million people, which is roughly 1/10 of the folks that live in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. But yet we occupy about 5% of the space. We discharge an average of 150 million gallons of wastewater a day in Hampton roads. But you gotta remember, we don't make the wastewater, we make it better. Our vision is really simple, that future generations will inherit clean waterways and to be able to keep them clean. But a lot of folks don't realize that wastewater treatment plants really were never designed to deal with nutrients. And you'll hear more about the TMDL, but I know from the crowd that most of you know a lot about the TMDL, and it's really focused on 3 pollutants, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. And from the wastewater perspective, nitrogen and phosphorus are what we're focused on. But we were never built to remove those pollutants. And the Clean Water Act in 1972, when it passed, put forward secondary treatment, and that dealt with BOD, biochemical oxygen demand, which is really a measure of water quality, total suspended solids, and then disinfection in some form or fashion for pathogens. And that's really all we've focused on, and we're not unique. That's what the industry did. So we never worried about nutrients. But back in the 90s, we started looking at nutrients long before it was really the thing to do. And HRSD voluntarily began removing nutrients at 2 plants. The first was the plant behind Old Dominion University. It's a Virginia Initiative plant. And that was actually a partnership between HRSD and an international engineering firm, CH2M Hill. We developed a process to biologically remove nutrients and patented that process. And that we implemented it there, and we've done it at another plant at the same time, long before we had to deal with nutrients. 2005, Virginia really started focusing on nutrients as a state. Legislation was passed that set waste load allocations for the state. And we've been moving quickly towards implementing those. And you may not think that between 2005 and 2012 is very fast, but nutrient removal at wastewater treatment plant is not something you just add chemical to or twist a few knobs on the treatment process and get that to happen. It requires a lot more energy, it requires more tanks, it requires a lot of construction. You've got to build that at a plant that's operating 24/7, 365 days a year. Complicated process, very expensive. Pleased to tell you that HRSD has met those goals for 2011, which was the first year that we needed to be in that permit compliance for nutrients. You know, it's a little disheartening from our end that that wasn't going to be enough. End of 2010, we just got to that point and we learned about the TMDL and some new goals for us. But we're excited about how to take the lessons we've learned from meeting the 2005 goals and moving those forward. So we've got 2 large plant projects ahead of us in 2017 and 2021 that will continue to challenge us to remove more nutrients. Again, we're on our way. Clean water's not free. Thanks to all of you, our HRSD customers, we're able to pay for this. You've seen it in your rates. We've had a great deal of help from the state of Virginia with the Water Quality Improvement Fund, which again was created in 2005 in anticipation of this needing to be a partnership. One fact that slips away a lot of times is less than 75% of folks that live in the Bay watershed are actually connected to a sewer system. So if you put all the burden of cleaning up the Bay on the people connected to the sewer system, you've got more than 25% of the people in the Bay watershed that aren't pulling their weight. So the state recognized that and has really contributed quite a bit to the local wastewater plants. So HRSD's received $111 million from the state to help offset those costs. So that's where we're going. We're moving towards 2017 and 2021 with 2 new projects. So.
Yeah, I commend you on being right on time there.
I'm working.
You set a good example, John.
Thank you, Congressman. Audience, it's great to be here tonight. The Hampton Roads Planning District Commission is one of 21 regional agencies in the Commonwealth. We have 16 localities. We serve 1.6 million people. They're a little bit different than the 1.6 million that TED serves, but many of them are the same folks. Our board is local elected officials, and we provide that forum for the local elected officials from 16 localities to discuss these kinds of issues and to develop some consensus recommendations. We don't do wastewater, but we coordinate and work with TED and with the 16 localities, 14 of whom are in the watershed, and 12 of whom have permits for that stormwater discharge. Most of us in Southside Hampton Roads and in the Hampton Roads area in general recognize that we have to pay a bill every quarter for our stormwater. We've been at this, excuse me, for about 4 years, working with the programs that were in place in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. We've had a number of parallel efforts dealing with sanitary sewer overflows, with TMDLs in small watersheds, not dealing with nutrients, dealing with bacteria primarily. Local partnerships with the Elizabeth River Project and Haven River now and the cities on the restoration of the Elizabeth and the Lynn Haven, as well as some other smaller streams in the peninsula and the Manson River on the south side. We've had a very engaged process with the localities for about the last 18 months on the TMDL. The agreement on the part of our board was that localities would work together, that they would develop the strategies. At the regional level, we would all work together to try and identify issues that were common, resources that we needed, problems with the TMDL that needed to be addressed, and so on. A complication in all of this was the fact that these localities have permits for stormwater, and suddenly we're being faced with some pretty stringent requirements and compliance obligations that they had not had to deal with prior to that time. In going through, I think we were very fortunate that we had an engaged board, we had an engaged local environmental committee of stormwater folks, planning folks from the localities, as well as a host of state, federal, and environmental organizations to work on the process. The localities looked at things to expand their programs, rather than build new programs, to look at things to provide multiple benefits, and through our regional process identified a number of research needs to correct deficiencies, what we saw as deficiencies in the Bay model and some of the regulatory programs. Going through this, we've had to struggle with making the balance between localities dealing with the sanitary sewer overflow issue and with the stormwater issues related to the TMDL. We need money and trying to balance that money because all of us are the ones paying those same bills. We needed to look at the potential for flexibility and modifications to permits as we move forward from a timing standpoint, from the experience of installing new best management practices. As we go forward, I think we will see more and more partnerships with those watershed organizations that we already have partnerships, more work with TED and with the state folks. We need to work together, and one thing that I think all of us are going to see as we go forward is that the bills are going to come to us, and there are things that we as individuals can do to clean up and to prevent an awful lot of the pollution that we're discharging to the stream. I beat 5 minutes.
Thank you, John. Thank you for your comments. Anthony?
Thank you, Congressman. We appreciate you inviting me down here to talk with the citizens about the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. Of course, we did submit our Phase 1 watershed implementation plan to EPA in December of 2011. That plan was approved, and I think we have a very good start on implementing different parts of that plan. Some of the things that we proposed were that we would look at restrictions on the use of phosphorus and non-agricultural lawn maintenance fertilizer. We wanted to make sure that development in golf courses and localities that actually use fertilizer would have to use nutrient management plans and put those plans in place. We wanted to look at the use of slow-release nitrogen and how that would help us to meet our reduction goals. Fortunately, in the 2011 General Assembly, Senator Stewart and Delegate Scott submitted legislation that put all 3 of those bullets in place. So now, by January the 1st of 2014, we'll no longer be able to use phosphorus in lawn maintenance fertilizer. So I think this will take us a long way to meeting some of the goals in our watershed implementation plan. Also, it will be unlawful to use de-icing agents that contain urea and nitrogen and those, you won't be able to use those on driveways or parking lots. So we think this will also help us to meet our goals. There was legislation also in the last General Assembly to implement the use of resource management plans. Now these will be plans that will be used on agricultural land that will look at the whole farm and see how we can put in the best management practices to meet the goals of the watershed implementation plan in their area. We're also looking at agricultural voluntary practices. We want to start tracking those practices that farmers don't get costlier dollars for to see if they're helping us to meet our goals. One of the things that we hear a lot of talk about is the cost of the TMDL. And this is something that Virginia has taken, not taken very lightly. The Senate Finance Committee estimated this year that the TMDL could cost around $16 billion over the life of the program. The administration estimated that it will cost around $8 billion. So those are realistic numbers, and you wonder why there's so much difference in those numbers. Well, it depends on the best management practices that you put in place. If you look at putting in nitrogen reduction technologies or practices in forest land, removing a pound of phosphorus or nitrogen could cost about $1.50. But if you look at in the urban stormwater area where you're retrofitting concrete and you have to dig up concrete, it could cost you as much as $1,000 to remove that same amount of nitrogen. So Virginia wanted to put together a plan that gave the localities the flexibility to look at what practices would help them to meet our goals. This year, we're working on the development of our Phase 2 watershed implementation plan. Our plan is due to EPA on March the 30th. Now that plan will provide more detail on how the localities will help us to meet our goals. We have worked with stakeholder groups, we've worked with local governments. John Pollack and this Hampton Roads PDC has been very helpful in providing us with information on what the localities will actually do to help put in best management practices to meet our goals. We looked at what the loads might be in each locality. We asked the localities to look at information in EPA's model to make sure that that information is correct. We want to make sure that we have the correct land uses so we can make a good estimate of what practices are needed. We've asked localities to give us information on what's in their 5-year plan and what they already have planned, so we can see if by 2017 or 2025 there are additional practices that we need to put in place to help us to meet our goals. We also developed a Virginia assessment and scenario tool, and that was like a simulation of the model, so the localities could actually look at what their reduction goals are and experiment with different best management practices to see how they can meet their goals. So we are hoping that plan will be put together and completed by March 30th, so we can submit it to the EPA.
Anthony, thank you very much. It's good to see my friend Jeff. Jeff Gordon, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
We have a little practice in our office that if someone's late to a meeting, they either have to tell a joke, sing, or put $1 in the coffee fund. I don't know which of these you want to pick, but no, we understand it's an excuse of absence coming through the tunnel. We fully understand. We're delighted that you're here. In fact, your timing is really perfect. Introduce the board. We've welcomed everyone here tonight, and basically what we're doing now, if you've got your wits about you and are settled in, we just ask each of our panelists to just walk through their perspective on TMDLs. And I don't want us to shy away tonight from anything controversial. You know, I think this is the time to work through differences of opinion. So if there are any, I think, I think we ought to, I just want to make sure that everybody understands you quote, have that